Welcome to the For These Reasons podcast by Calcos Legal.
Glad to be here.
Today we're doing a deep dive, really getting into the nitty-gritty of something pretty fundamental in law, the anatomy of an intentional tort.
Yeah, think of it as looking under the hood. We want to show you the essential parts, the core components.
Exactly. So you can walk away knowing what to look for, what really makes these claims work.
And you'll find pretty much consistently there are these three key elements that pop up again and again.
Right. We're talking volition, intent, and harm. Those are the big three.
The building blocks, yeah.
Okay, so let's start with the first one. Volition. What's the main idea there?
Volition is, well, it's pretty simple, really. It just means acting voluntarily, making a conscious choice to move or act.
So it's like the first gate you have to pass through before you even think about what someone intended.
Precisely. It's a foundational. If the act wasn't voluntary, the whole intentional tort analysis kind of stops there.
Okay, give us an example.
All right, imagine John's just walking along. Eric walks past him. A low-hanging tree limb catches on Eric's shirt.
Okay.
The limb snaps back and hits John. Then, maybe John's hand jerks from the impact and knocks Lucy's phone out of her hand.
Okay.
Now, Eric chose to walk there. Sure, that's volitional. But the limb hitting John, Eric didn't voluntarily make the limb hit John. It snagged him.
Right, it was an accident caused by the branch, not Eric deciding to hit John with it.
Exactly. And John's hand twitching. Probably an involuntary reflex from being struck, not a conscious decision to swat Lucy's phone.
So you only really dig into volition if the facts make you question whether the person actually chose to make that specific movement.
That's the crux of it, yeah. Was it a conscious act?
Got it. Okay, so if we get past volition, the act was voluntary, then we hit intent. Let's use battery as our example here. What's the rule for battery?
Sure. Battery is defined as an intentional act that causes harmful or offensive contact with another person.
And the key word there is intentional. What does that mean legally? It's not just about being angry or meaning harm, is it?
No, not necessarily malice. In tort law, intentional act means one of two things. Either the person, the defendant, desired the contact to happen.
They wanted it.
Or, and this is often more common, they were substantially certain that the contact would result from their actions.
Substantially certain. That sounds like a high bar. How do we know?
Well, we don't read minds. We use the reasonable person standard. It's objective. Would a reasonable person in the defendant's shoes have known or been substantially certain that contact would occur?
Okay, so back to Eric just walking past John before the branch incident. A reasonable person wouldn't think just walking normally down a street is substantially certain to cause contact with someone else, right?
Generally, no.
Wow.
Which is why intent would be hard to prove in that initial walk-by before the branch complication.
Right.
But here's where intent gets really interesting. There's this concept called transferred intent.
I've heard of this.
Yeah, it means if you intend to commit a tort against one person, let's say battery.
Like you swing at person A.
Right. You swing at A, but you miss and hit person B standing nearby. Your intent to batter A transfers to person B.
Wow. So you're still liable for battery against B, even though you weren't aiming for them.
Exactly. The law says the wrongful intent was there, it just landed on someone else. This applies to most intentional torts: battery, assault, false imprisonment, trespass, but not all.
Which ones doesn't it apply to?
The big exceptions are i.e. intentional infliction of emotional distress and conversion, which is about property.
Okay, that's important. And you can't transfer intent from property to a person, right? Like if I intend to key someone's car but accidentally hit the owner instead.
Correct. The intent to damage property doesn't morph into intent to batter a person. Different types of intent.
Good distinction. Okay, so we have a voluntary act, volition, and the required intent, maybe even transferred intent. What's the last piece? Harmful or offensive contact.
Right. And this also has some nuances. It requires actual contact.
Someone has to actually touch the person or something connected to them.
Yes. But here's the thing. It doesn't have to cause physical injury. It doesn't need to leave a mark or hurt in the traditional sense.
So what makes it harmful or offensive?
The contact itself can be the harm if it's unwanted, and it would offend a reasonable person's sense of personal dignity. It protects your right to, not be touched without consent in offensive ways.
So like an unwanted poke, even if it doesn't hurt, could be battery.
It could, yes, if a reasonable person would find it offensive. Now, context matters. A friendly pat on the back, usually not offensive.
But what if someone hates being touched, even lightly?
Okay, good point. That brings in the known sensitivity exception. If the person doing the touching knows the other person has an unusual sensitivity or aversion to that type of contact.
Then even a light touch could become offensive.
It could, yes. Because the defendant's knowledge changes the analysis slightly. It adds a subjective element.
Okay. And does the contact have to be person to person directly?
No, it can be indirect. If you intentionally act on something closely connected to the person, like knocking a plane out of their hand or kicking their cane.
Or pulling a chair out from under them as they're sitting down.
Exactly. That counts as contact with the person for battery purposes.
Okay, this is starting to form a clear picture. Let's try applying it. You mentioned Eric and John earlier. Let's change it slightly. Say Eric is walking, sees the tree limb is low and in his way. To avoid it without stopping, he decides to deliberately, bump John slightly out of his path.
Okay.
John stumbles from falls into Lucy, who then stumbles into the street and unfortunately gets hit by a bicycle messenger, damaging the bike. Let's just focus on Eric's liability to John first. Battery.
All right, let's break it down. First, volition. Did Eric act voluntarily?
Yes, the scenario says he deliberately decided to bump John. Conscious choice.
Okay, volition, Matt. Second, intent. Did Eric intend harmful or offensive contact? Remember, intent is desire or substantial certainty.
Well, he desired to bump John to get him out of the way. And bumping someone is definitely contact. A reasonable person knows bumping someone means touching them.
Right, so he was, at minimum, substantially certain contact would result from his intentional bump. Intent seems met.
Okay. Third, harmful or offensive contact. Did it happen?
He made physical contact, the bump. Was it harmful or offensive? It wasn't consented to, so it was unwanted. Would a reasonable person find an uninvited bump offensive to their dignity?
Probably, yeah. Being bumped out of the way isn't usually welcome. Doesn't need to cause injury, just be offensive.
Exactly. So, applying the elements, it seems pretty likely Eric is liable for battery against John.
And what about Lucy? John bumped into her because Eric bumped him.
Now we're potentially looking at transferred intent again, right?
Right.
Eric intended the bump against John. The contact transferred through John to Lucy. That's a possibility.
And the bike messenger's damaged bike.
Well, remember, intent generally doesn't transfer to property damage for a tort-like conversion in the same way. That would likely be analyzed differently, perhaps under negligence or trespass to chattels, which are topics for another day.
Got it. So this battery framework is really specific.
It is. And understanding these core pieces, volition, intent, harm, helps you see the structure.
This has been really helpful. We've got volition as the voluntary act, intent meaning desire or substantial certainty, plus that interesting transferred intent idea, and then harmful or offensive contact, which isn't just about physical injury.
That's the essence of it. It's the anatomy. The basic structure you'll see modified slightly for other intentional torts, but these foundations remain key.
So as you go about your day, maybe you'll start seeing interactions through this lens. Was it voluntary? Was there intent? Was there contact? Food for thought.
Definitely gives you a different perspective.
Join us next time as we continue exploring the fascinating world of tort law.